World War II on the Eastern Front was the largest, deadliest land war in human history. Over 30 million soldiers, 70,000 tanks, and 4 years of non-stop destruction. This is the story of every key Russian vehicle that changed the outcome of World War II. One of the earliest was the T-26, a lightly armored infantry tank, whose simple, boxy design was far from impressive. It was slow, thin-skinned, and mechanically fragile under harsh combat, yet it was everywhere in the Red Army. When the war began, thousands of T-26s faced the Blitzkrieg head-on, often being destroyed in scores, but their sacrifice bought precious time for the Soviet defense to reorganize. Alongside it operated the BT series, fast, agile, and almost experimental in concept. The BT-5 and BT-7 were fast tanks, capable of reaching highway speeds unheard of for armored vehicles of the era. Their Christie's suspension allowed them to literally fly across open fields. They were lightly armored, vulnerable to German guns, but their speed made them effective in early maneuvers. These tanks also served as the technological ancestors of the vehicle that would soon become the icon of the Eastern Front, the T-34. But before we reach that legend, we must meet the Soviet Union's early attempt at a heavy breakthrough tank, the KV-1. The KV-1 was a steel monster for its time, thick armor, brutal weight, and shockingly durable against German weapons in 1941. Many German units reported that their guns simply bounced off the KV-1's plates. Some KV tanks held off entire columns for hours. However, the KV-1 was slow, mechanically stressed, and difficult to maintain. Yet on the battlefield, it was an immovable wall when the Red Army needed it the most. Then came the vehicle that changed everything, the T-34. When the Germans first encountered the T-34, they were stunned. The tank's sloped armor, powerful 76mm cannon, wide tracks designed for mud and snow, and rugged simplicity completely shifted the balance of armored warfare. The T-34 was not just a tank, it was a revelation. It combined firepower, protection, and mobility better than anything Germany had in 1941. This single vehicle became the backbone of the Red Army, produced in staggering numbers, rebuilt again and again, and ultimately upgraded into the T-34-85, giving it a harder punch against German Panthers and Tigers. The T-34 wasn't perfect. It lacked comfort, had crude optics, and was often brutally difficult for crews. But in war, quantity with quality wins, and the T-34 had both. While the T-34 dominated the mid-war battlefield, the Soviets also fielded new heavy armor, the KV-1S, a lighter and more mobile version of the original KV, followed by the KV-85, which mounted a bigger gun to counter German heavy tanks. But as German armor continued to evolve, Russia responded with something even more powerful, the IS series. The IS-1 and the IS-2 were breakthrough heavy tanks designed to shatter fortified positions and take on the biggest threats of the war. The IS-2, equipped with its devastating 122mm gun, was capable of knocking out a Tiger with a single well-placed shot. Its shells were so massive that they could tear open bunkers, collapse buildings, and obliterate enemy positions. By 1944, the IS-2 had become one of the most feared tanks on the Eastern Front. Now we move to self-propelled guns, vehicles designed to provide mobile artillery support and direct fire tank destruction. One of the earliest was the Su-76, a lightweight, open-top vehicle armed with a 76mm gun. It was simple, cheap, and extremely common, acting as the Red Army's mobile artillery workhorse. Crews often joked that the Su-76 was the little coffin, but despite its vulnerability, it played a huge role in supporting infantry across the front. Then came the Su-122, a larger and more powerful assault gun carrying a 122mm howitzer, ideal for smashing fortifications. But the real tank killers of the Eastern Front were the Su-85, Su-100, and Su-152. The Su-85 was designed specifically to counter German Panthers, while the Su-100, one of the finest tank destroyers of the war, mounted a long-barreled 100 mm gun capable of defeating even the heaviest German tanks. The Su-152 and ISU-152, nicknamed Zwiebelboy or Beast Slayer, could obliterate Tigers and Panthers with sheer explosive power. Their massive shells didn't just penetrate armor, they destroyed tanks through blunt force and internal shockwaves. The ISU-122 and ISU-152 combined the heavy chassis of the IS tank with enormous guns, forming the backbone of Soviet assault artillery in the final push toward Berlin. These vehicles were slow but unstoppable, often used to level entire city blocks during the brutal urban fighting of 1945. While tanks and assault guns dominated headlines, lighter vehicles played equally important roles. The BA-10 and BA-20 armored cars served as reconnaissance vehicles, offering speed and mobility, though they were lightly protected and struggled off-road. Later, the BA-64 became the Red Army's standard scout car, compact, sloped, and surprisingly stable on rough terrain. There were also the small T-27 tankettes and T-37 and T-38 amphibious tanks, which acted as reconnaissance machines and river-crossing scouts during the early war years. They were tiny, almost fragile, but they performed crucial tasks behind the lines and during special operations. And of course, the Soviet war effort relied heavily on trucks, especially the Gaz-AA and the ZIS-5. These trucks transported soldiers, ammunition, fuel, and artillery pieces across the unforgiving landscapes of the Eastern Front. Without them, the Red Army's massive offensives would have been impossible. Even the legendary Katyusha rocket launcher was mounted on trucks, turning these humble vehicles into terrifying engines of destruction. When the Katyusha fired, its shrieking rockets sent entire German units diving for cover. In the later years of the war, specialized engineering vehicles also appeared. Bridge layers, recovery tanks, and flamethrower tanks like the OT-34. Flamethrower variants were used to clear bunkers, trenches, and urban strongpoints, forcing enemy troops to abandon fortified positions. These were some of the most feared machines on the battlefield, not because of armor or speed, but because of the psychological terror they created. And finally, in the last months of the war, the Red Army deployed the IS-3, a tank so advanced in design that it looked like something from the future. Its heavily sloped, rounded pike-nose armor shocked Western armies when it rolled into the Allied victory parade in Berlin. Although it arrived too late to significantly affect combat, the IS-3 became a symbol of the Soviet Union's rising military power after World War II. From fragile early tankettes to unstoppable heavy tanks, from artillery carriers to rocket trucks, these vehicles formed a war machine capable of absorbing unimaginable losses and still pushing forward. They operated in frozen winters, muddy springs, burning summers, and ruined cities. They engaged in the largest tank battles in human history, from the desperate defense of 1941 to the triumphant march into Berlin 4 years later. This was the armored evolution of the Red Army, a story of innovation, sacrifice, brutal conditions, and overwhelming production. These machines were not refined or luxurious. They were rugged, practical, and built with one purpose: to win the most destructive war the world has ever known. And together, they did.